then I stayed with it. So we're recording now. Welcome,
Excellent.
Matthew.
Thank you.
You're in LA, right?
Yeah, yeah. I'm in the Los Angeles, the crazy, insane frequency fence zone of Los Angeles, surrounded by chaos and intensity. But it's actually a really, really cool place. There's a lot of really amazing people here. And it's not all bad. It's just really crazy.
Yeah, LA is interesting. I have a sister in Long Beach. She might have moved slightly, but I have a sister that I do visit every couple of years, and I know of LA.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm not a huge fan, but she's out there, so I come visit
Yeah.
occasionally.
I would say prior to moving here about 2 years ago, I lived in San Diego area for almost my entire life. I'd say 80% of it. And even though LA was literally only 2 hours up the freeway, I avoided it so tremendously. I mean, I was incredibly polarized against the city for some reason because every time I would go there, and maybe that's just like what happens when we're an empath and we don't know it. But
Hmm.
the time I would go to LA, it was like I would feel sick, I would feel bitter and sort of just like resentful. It was a very, very strange realm. So here we are, all these years later, and I'm suddenly living here.
That's how it works. It's very strange. You have this thing that you're like, oh, very averse to, and you're like, there's no possible way I would ever interact with that entity or that particular thought form, and then somehow while you're pushing it, you're bringing it closer at the same time, and then
Yeah,
eventually it's just like, okay, well, it wasn't even that bad of a thing in the first place. It was just something that I needed to look at.
yeah, really. I think we get like a node assignment for those of us that might identify with being like a grid worker or having some sort of energetic influence on the grid or the larger environmental area as a whole. And I find that people, at least right now, and probably yourself on a certain level as well, it will be sort of placed in a geographic area, sometimes without really any real knowledge of what it is and why we're doing it. But in my opinion, it's because a lot of us right now are these frequency keepers, and we're these holders of a certain frequency that has to do with this ascension and uh, the multi-dimensional, like energy that's arising in each of us. And in my opinion, I think I was assigned to Los Angeles, just like you were probably assigned to. I think you were in like Fresno, and we don't really
Hmm.
realize that we're there, but we'll be brought there for some, strange series of circumstances,
Yeah,
activations, and learning. So it's a
yeah,
thing.
it's like Lemony Snicket's strange series of what was it called? Strange series of events.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Strange series of events, which is weird because I use that phrase all the time, and I'm so unfamiliar with that series. But I'm always like, yeah, through a strange or unfortunate series of events, it's like a weird phrase that he used. But yeah, anyway,
Synchronicity.
yeah. So here we are.
Yeah. Can I ask how old you are?
Oh yes, I am 41. I'll be 42 at the end of this year.
You look very young. You look like my age, which
Oh, thank you. Thanks. I actually think that I'm one of the people, and this is a weird way to start your show with a huge can of worms, but I believe that I'm one of those people that had kind of a late blooming walk in or soul braiding experience that ended up actually causing, by my opinion and understanding, somewhat of like a DNA activation that actually it's a heavy statement, but I feel like I reversed aged a little bit. And for those of people that are even friends with me on Facebook, can go back and look at the photos of me from a few years ago, and they will see that there's literally a different person there. It's a thing that happens to a lot of us. I think during that like awakening process, like we'll go through these changes, and I think when they really sink in and we fully embody or begin to fully embody that thing that we're starting to become, crazy things happen in the body. So thanks, I appreciate that. you know.
when do you think that when do you feel that started happening, like a reversal aging, or is that something that happened immediately after the walk-in?
Well, in my opinion, I believe that a lot of us, and myself included, started somewhat of a forced awakening or a timed sort of opening of what could be, if we're talking about energetic anatomy, the crown chakra, or a specific chakra or energetic anatomy layer of the body. For a lot of us, begin to come online. In my understanding, around the 2012 shift. The whole like December 2012 thing. And I was vaguely aware of a lot of this stuff at the time, but I was not involved in it. I was into like disclosure, but I wasn't like super obsessed. And around December of 2012, I had a crazy event where it was like the top of my head was ripping open all of a sudden, and I started to lose my mind, and I started talking to animals for a couple of weeks, and really going. At the time, thought I was going crazy. I was working in the mental health field at the time as a counselor, and I actually lied and told them that I was getting treatment for some sickness, and I had to go on all these meds, and it was like I squashed it down inside myself. I was having
Mm-hmm.
and I went on meds, and I squished it down back into my body, and I kind of went back to normal for about a year or two. In around
Huh.
2015, it started, and there was really no way that I could stop it. I've said this in other interviews, but I literally went to this work function at the time. There was a woman there, and they were doing energy work, and I was really unaware of a lot of this stuff at the time. And she literally went to me, and she was like, "Hey, so do you want an energy blessing?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, I don't really want to go back to my work tent over there. So yeah, sure, yeah, go ahead." And she put her hands on the top of my head, for me, maybe like 2 or 3 minutes. And within 30 days of that moment, it sounds crazy, but literally so many things organically just shifted in my life. It was like this thing started happening. And that was just one stop along the way. But for me, I believe that's where that process began to start. And for those of us that have had a walk-in experience, for some people, it will be one singular event. Some people will have an accident. A version of them in the body will die, and they'll step out, and there'll be a predetermined agreement in which that other entity or another version of them, higher dimensional plane, can step in and begin to inhabit, which is a very a very delicate term, the original like container. And some of us will have somewhat of a soul braid experience where we will have this sort of cascading domino like effect where this sort of unraveling will occur over a period of time. And so for me, I characterize or now understand the beginning of that soul braiding event to be, I believe, around 2015, as I understand. So I hope that makes sense. It was more of a gradual thing.
And soul braiding, is that with another being or with another aspect of yourself? What does that mean
That's a,
exactly?
that's a That's a really good question. Thanks. So by my understanding, and this is what kind of has been shown to me since then, and I think many of us will find in the years coming and through our own work that we're having much the same experience, but I believe it to be a member or an aspect of my own self, the multidimensional aspect of Matthew. And if you look into the law of one, it actually talks about how a lot of us are in constant contact with the sixth density version of ourselves who have made a choice to come back into this third density space to catalyze the spiritual, physical, and energetic growth that we're experiencing during this life. So by my understanding, I believe that it's actually me on a future timeline, in a future density, on a higher level, like dimensional plane, that through some, strange series of agreements, somehow allowed a greater level of interactivity with the third dimensional version of Matthew for a very specific series of, I guess we could say, missions or sort of tasks or things that I chose to do. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that answers your question. I might be going on a tangent.
No, it's pretty good. So it feels like you're. It does not feel amorphous or vague. You feel like what's happening with you is very distinct and clear.
I would say that it is. I can tell you that I would say in summer of 2017, I had to make this choice literally where I was like working as a counselor in like the mental health field, working with like veterans in addiction treatment. That was about 7 years of my life. And right around summer of 2017, I had literally made that choice to put my things on the curb, leave my marriage and my job and this house that I, owned with my wife. And literally, I had to step fully into this thing that was happening. Um, and so there's definitely a leap of faith in that. It became like kind of the sole identity of what I'm doing now. And it was such a, it was like I was literally jumping off a cliff into a new version of me. And for some people, they'll end up doing that. For me, I guess I was a risk taker and I jumped right into it. So, no, it's definitely not an amorphous thing. It's absolutely this like solidified kind of version of Matthew that exists now. But it's also very uncertain. In that I think along with that kind of like stepping into a new identity or like embodying, I guess, the true version of the self, there's a lot of uncertainty, and it's kind of
Hmm.
a it's definitely a process. So
It's yeah,
I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah.
it's something that for me personally has always been difficult to relate, because relate means like you have something previously with which to bounce it off of, and if you're having a new experience every moment, not necessarily to that level, but that's the sort of trending of it, then it's difficult to be able to explain to people who are used to patterns and repetition for the most part. And I know even those of us who are going through, I guess you could say, larger wobbles, because likely the patterns are there regardless, depending on where your level of consciousness is at. But those
Yeah.
who are those of us who are going through the larger wobbles are going to have a harder time finding someone who can empathize with those movements.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I think that's why kind of the search for self identity and what they call knowledge of self is probably, in my opinion, and what's wild is this might even be kind of non sequitorial to what you're saying right now, but one of the early experiences I had with one of the teachers at the time that I was working with told me that like once you learn who you truly are, there is nothing you cannot do, and the world around you will form to the identity of that very thing which you have become. Once you know who you truly are, and at the time I was like, "What? Huh? Oh, okay, yeah, yeah, cool." But the years since, it's like I found that knowledge of self to be paramount over everything else, and it feels like what you're saying right there has something to do with you coming into the stage in which you're gaining that knowledge of self, and you're sort of stepping into that. While it's like a dualistic version of us, like we become the truest, rooted version of ourselves in that body on that third dimensional timeline. And I don't know, maybe that's not even what you were talking about, but that's kind of what I heard in that moment. So
Yeah, no, it comes to where, for me, where I would say there's it is a dual aspect of being conscious, where you have the mechanistic unfolding of sensory inputs to yourself, and then you also have the unknown aspect, which allows freedom, right, for basically anything to come in, and those two bounce off of each other and create this sort of harmony. I was talking with my earlier guest. His name's Matt. His will air later on today, but what he was talking about. He was talking about orgonite, and he was saying how it's a composite between organic and metallic, and he was saying that the metallic reflects the frequency, and the organic receives like a female, sort of like it receives it and then transmutes and then maybe gives it out at some point after that, but how those two bounce off of each other. And I feel
that
like that's kind of what we're
makes sense.
seeing with our desire for repetition and routine, things that feel comfortable to us, and then also we need the unknown. We need this thing that we just have no clue about. But those two have to somehow harmonize.
I hear you. I hear you. Huh. Yeah. Huh. Interesting. Thank you. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how to respond to that. I don't actually have that much knowledge of orgonite, but it's funny the way that you mentioned this person describing it, because one of the things I've noticed in just sort of feeling things, like I tend to feel everything. I don't really like understand the chemical structure of how things work, but if I'm able to feel a certain thing, it's as if I'll be shown what's actually happening there. And what's
Hmm.
wild, interesting, non sequitur, I was recently shown a lot of stuff about 5G in particular and where that's going to be affecting our body if you're interested in that. But one of the things I discovered about orgonite in like particular, and it's funny that you're talking about that sort of male and female sort of like polarization, is I work in a store at times in which we have a lot of orgonite, and I'll sort of hold my hand over it and I'll notice literally there's like this dual, or like this almost like two streams of energy that seems to come out of it. And I don't know why, for some reason, my consciousness sort of like grabbed onto that organite statement, because that's a bit of a confirmation of what I will feel without really knowing anything about it. And I'll sort of like sit there and be like, huh, interesting. And there is very much both of those two elements, if that makes sense. So.
Yeah, and I'm not a chemist. I don't understand sort of the electrical properties. I know that a lot of people talk about the electromagnetic universe and how it's put together, but I'm kind of like a beginner as far as applying words to my understanding of these scientific terms. So if somebody like says some things, then I will just like it will get thrown into the blender of my mind, and I'll come out with some sort of feeling. It comes out with some sort of feeling from it. Like that's to me what kind of
Yeah.
that's the anchor point for it.
Definitely. Yeah. You seem to, just in sort of like picking up the energy that you present with, seem to have a much more physical aspect of empathy pertaining mostly to what I believe is going to be your small intestinal like meridian structure right now, meaning that you're probably, and you can just tell me, you might be like, oh, this is totally not true, but it feels as if you're gaining a much greater awareness of intuitive frequencies in the body by using something that you would call maybe your gut instinct. Because even as you're talking about that, your vibrations move from here immediately down to right here. And it's if something kind of bypasses right here, which could be, uh, like a number of things, but it's as if you're having what I would call the solar plexus activation, or the activation of energy within the intestinal meridians, which is a big, activation for intuitive areas. In fact, that's actually your second brain, another brain in the body, and it's in
The
your
solar
intestines.
plexus.
So, yeah, the solar plexus, your intestinal meridians. And if you want, you can even Google the small intestine meridian, and I believe its relationship with either the lungs or the heart, in that they tend to feed each other, and they'll come in these pairs. And they have this synergistic energy thing. And so as one area activates or sort of like comes alive as we go through this, awakening and this ascension process, like greater levels of intuitive awareness come in. And just as you're talking, you're having this sort of
So you can visually see these energy centers.
sometimes I can see it. I will say the way that it tends to come through is a feeling that I will get in my body. And, maybe this is branching off into kind of a weird kind of words. One of the ways in which I think I'm doing empathic or sort of energy work is I'll sit with a person, I hear their voice, as long as I can get a first name, because a lot of people will do this thing where they'll want like a birth date and like your astrological sign. And I don't think you need any of that. I think as long as you can connect with someone and hear their voice and sort of, and sometimes get a visual picture of them, even maybe even hold their hand for a second, because we have hand chakras right here that you can actually use as like it's like a connection point or like a plug-in. But I'll sort of take a breath in as I'm talking, and what's crazy is literally anyone can do this, but we're not taught that we're capable of doing it, and so no one ever tries to do it, and as a result they don't know they can. But you can literally connect with someone and take a breath in and just simply intend that you're taking an essence of them in, or you're just, I'm breathing in this person. And for me, it'll give me a feeling in the body. It'll give me a signal, or like a warmth, maybe a twitch. But most of the time, it's literally just like, oh yeah, this is this area. I know what this feels like. And it tends to come through the tone of voice, because one of the things I do in my sessions is as long as we can like connect auditorially, it tends to allow that level of like connection. But for everyone it varies, and I think that you're just probably really empathic and maybe we're like well connected in the moment. But I would say it's like a mix of sensory and like visual, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sense enough. I've done I've done Reiki off and on for the past maybe year and a half, and that sensation of feeling inside of somebody else's energetic like inner structure to me at first was the strangest sensation, and even having her like feel into I had things like moving and crawling and tickling on my body just because, and I had
Yeah.
no clue. I was like, what is this, you know? But once I realized that that itself was just sort of like those movements were not even important. That was literally just a sign that said this is something that's real and is doing something, and this is a minor way of us letting you know that it's fine, basically.
Yeah.
Because they went away. They didn't keep going.
Hmm. What sort of sensation around that time? Like, what kind of stuff was happening?
It was like I would have like tracer feeling on the surface of my skin, like as if someone was lightly running their fingertip
Mm-hmm.
up my back to that point in the back of your head, the like top of the spine kind of thing,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
and they would just like hit there
Cerebellum
and
chakra, totally.
yeah. And it was strange. Maybe I've been numbed out for a while, so I just haven't like felt into what is just normally me for a while.
Yeah. Interesting.
But that was
Time-
like
yeah, that can be a number of things. But I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, that was just like a gentle way I felt that I was being shown what your left brain logic mind says as far as worldviews is just kind of like horse shit for the most part, and it's fine. You can hold those, but the sort of like flowy, more more feminine aspects are trying to come back in, and uh, and it's like it's fine. You can't use logic to say like this is one or this is the other. It just is what it is.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned that. Something about what like the divine masculine or the divine feminine aspects within each of us. And I don't know, maybe once again I'm kind of non sequitorial today, so it might be going in a whole other direction. But one of the things I'm finding in like the work that I'm doing is people will actually come in with, and for a lot of us we'll have like a male side and a female side. For a lot of us the female side is the left side, male side will be the right side, but some people will have them flipped, and that's the thing. I've heard people say that it's always one or the other. In my opinion, it's absolutely not. But I'll find people that will come in, and this almost can apply to the hemispheres in the brain, in which we'll have one side of the body, or rather we could say the energy body, the like dimensional layers or energetic anatomy will literally be on top of the other, will be kind of like imbalanced, and so it's funny that that's actually a thing. And so there's certain things we can do within the energy body to kind of balance those things out, and we find that when we kind of move or restructure these, what will even show up at times as like plates or actual kind of like structures within the body, it creates this interesting sort of harmonization, which also on a certain level can contribute to the physical sensations of energy moving through the body, and even something like Reiki.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting observation on the stuff that you're saying there. It's definitely it's definitely real.
Yeah, yeah. I had to look up non sequitur because I hadn't like heard that phrase for a
Oh,
while.
right, yeah, that's basically where you're going outside of the content of the, it's just like you're shooting off in this whole other, yeah. You know what's wild is I actually learned that term for my son when he was in third grade. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh, seriously, like his teacher had said, this is a non sequitur. And I remember my son came home and I was like, what? What's that? How do you even know what that means? And so, my son taught me that word in third grade as an adult.
How old's
So,
your son?
now he's 17. He's going to be 18 this year. So,
Wow.
but, so kind of just stayed with me.
Your only child?
Yeah.
Okay.
Interesting, but
My
yeah.
kid's almost 4. He's gonna be.
Oh, cool! That was an awesome age. Those were some of the best times of my life, actually.
Yeah.
It's a good time.
But non sequitur from what Google told me, it just means something that's like tangential or hardly related to the conversational
Yeah.
flow,
Yeah, there you go.
which is
Absolutely.
it's kind of that's very normal for me. Is like it's hard for me to describe how my conversation goes, but it's like I don't put very much precedence on. I guess you could say it's non-agended to an extent, but
Yeah.
like everything's interesting. So if you come up with something, then we'll fly off into that corner, and then
Oh, totally.
I come up with something. Nobody knows where it's going, basically.
No, it's cool. I'm with you. Totally. I'm gonna do a little bit of a reading for you. Okay with that?
Yeah, sure.
I'm just gonna pull a couple cards for Gary, just because it's here. And right before I came on here, I was like, I don't know if I can do any readings. But then right before we came on, I was like, you know what? I think I'm gonna bring these cards here for some reason. And as you're talking, it's suddenly like just felt appropriate. And I don't know, maybe you'll have other people on in the 30 days. And some of these things you might find out will end up being true. But if it's all right, we can just ask about Gary's energy or anything Gary needs to be made aware of in the moment, just with respect to whatever, is coming on his timeline, with the Snail show, Gary's own path forward and discovery of the self, his ascension process and awakening. So we'll just ask for any information from Gary. So mind, body, spirit, consciousness, Gary. Oh, nice. Your first card's very cool, and it's okay if you don't know anything about tarot. I realize I'm kind of just throwing this on you in the last.
I know a little bit. My friend Eden, and she's in San Francisco. She's my Reiki teacher, actually.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And they do the card pulling thing sometimes when I'm there, so I know a little bit about it.
Nice. So, we ask, what do we need to know about Gary today? What's going on with Gary? What's happening in Gary's world? And he gets the Three of Cups, which is actually a pretty cool thing. I think if you're in a process of trying to build, participate, or involve yourself within a community of people in a social setting in which you're exchanging, sharing energy, sharing emotion, or just a part of a group, this is a very positive thing to have, because it will tell you that there's a synergy within your social environment, often between you and other people. It could also be immediate family. It can also just be a very tight social group. When the Three of Cups shows up, in my opinion, it's one of the universal indicators of a positive community-like energy. It's always going to be between yourself and other people in a group.
Three of what again is it? Three of what?
The Three of Cups.
Cups. Okay.
Yeah. And so in tarot, the cups will correspond with our emotions, our relationships, our self-identity, the sort of vessel that you have, the thing that you carry into the world. Those are the cups. For most people, when they look at classical tarot, people will see cups as like their boyfriend, girlfriend relationship, family type connections, which it is all of those things. But in multi-dimensional tarot, the cups actually correspond with much more, and they become actual structures within the body. They'll correspond with specific types of emotions, chakras like meridian, and they can even indicate, depending on the cards, specific blockages that will occur within our energetic anatomy as well.
Okay.
I don't know if that makes sense, but you also have the Six of Pentacles, which in my opinion is very relevant and synergistic with the 30-day show thing that you're doing, because what happens with the Six of Pentacles in tarot is it's a situation in which, first off, if we get a six, it's saying go, continue, proceed with a thing, do an action, go, like usually a positive yes, but it'll give you a little bit more than that, because the Six of Pentacles will also say invest in a certain thing, with the understanding that a thing that we're investing in is going to yield direct results that are absolutely proportional to whatever we put into it. So when the Six of Pentacles comes out, it's telling you that you're making an investment that has a direct impact on your future in terms of whatever you put into it. And I don't know if you can even see this, but there's this guy here, and he's handing out money.
Pentacles?
Handing him money. You know what I mean? We don't really know what it is.
Yeah.
A multi-layered archetypal image. But when this guy shows up, there's an exchange of something going on, and that exchange benefits both parties. So the thing with Pentacles is it's not always about money or stuff. Pentacles correspond with the currency of your desire. So whatever it is that you're trying to create in this world, it's pretty good for that. It tells you that you're moving in a positive direction. I will say I did pull one other card for you, which is a little bit contrasting, and this could be maybe a feeling that you've had recently, something that could come back at times. The severity is variable, because some people see this card right here and it's really intense. And I mean, it could be. What this tends to mean when Nine of Swords shows up is a lot of some sort of mental activity. Anything from gallbladder blockage, which is like this sort of energetic loop that runs in our mind when we're constantly caught up on a certain thing and we just keep playing it over and over again. Or at times just feeling a little bit overwhelmed.
Yesterday. That was yesterday.
Oh, was it? Oh, interesting. Yeah. Okay, so she has a literal significance, and she'll even tell you what's overwhelming. Just so you know, it's a buildup of like communication and social based interactivity. That's the realm of swords. So they'll even tell you what it's about. Swords are all about how we speak,
Mm-hmm.
when like communication, intellectual communication, that thing that you transmit out of yourself, the way the world like receives you is swords. The way that you receive the world, it's all about the movement of information. So
Yeah, yeah. Yesterday
yeah,
I was feeling overwhelmed with this particular challenge that I'm doing, and I got caught up into that. And my normal way of dealing with frustration is to go bipolar or go to the extreme. So say like, okay, screw it, like I'm dumping all of it. That's I would do that. I would look at the worst possible and then the best possible, and then hopefully come back to some sort of center, like reasonable
yeah.
position. So that's where I was at yesterday.
Do you find that when you will get in somewhat of an overwhelmed state that you'll feel that sort of back and forth of the highly polarized either
Mm-hmm.
emotional or mental activity within the body or the mind? Is that like a constant or a familiar place that you'll go to in times of overwhelm?
Yeah, yeah. I don't go there often. I've gotten to a pretty steady spot internally
Yeah.
to with what I'm doing, but if I do get pushed to that spot somehow, then after enough time, I eventually pay attention to it, even though I usually want to evade and not look at whatever is trying to be shown to me.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, yesterday was definitely a thing.
Yeah. I'm sorry to cut you off there. That's interesting because it actually corresponds with a couple energetic areas within the body that can affect our mental and emotional well-being. And it's kind of been, I guess it's easy for me to go there because it's literally what I've been talking about constantly, and I'm sort of like putting together like a workshop thing that I'm doing in June right now, on June 2nd, where we're going to be talking about the nature of not only etheric implantation, but how energy gets blocked in the body, how emotion gets blocked in the body, where it goes, how to understand, when it's, when's my urinary bladder, like meridian, being blocked up with emotion? What does that even mean? How does that manifest in the body? What does that mean energetically on a third dimensional day to day basis? And why is that important for me to know that? Well, that's one of the things that you're talking about there. It's a kidney-based energy, urinary bladder-based energy, and what they have to do with is the intensity of emotion, intensity of frustration, and that sort of bipolar 1 to 10 or 1 to 11 volume-like switch that our body has that gets very intense. And when we get there, we can get very stubborn and very stuck in that cycle, and that's the urinary bladder, that stubbornness and urgency. And the kidneys is that very frustrated kind of up and down intense emotional volume that exists in the body. And so when that mixes with something like energy of the spleen in the organ itself, actually creates frustrated and difficult emotional states that come through the body or come through our consciousness in these sort of like bursts, or we're doing really good or something will happen. I don't know, maybe I'm just kind of leaning into this because of what you described of yesterday, but it's like we'll have these sort of like pressurized bubbles in the body and we'll go into this sort of state. And those are the things that we look for when we're experiencing an energy blockage, some sort of a frequency interference from what could be outside entities, or what I believe will inevitably be 5G frequencies, and then other people's emotion, other types of stuff in the body. But just an interesting point of reference for I
Can
think what's happened. So
can you
yeah, I hope that
speak
makes sense.
can you speak a bit on how you feel the 5G thing will affect our internal energetic states?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And what's weird is lately, this is actually the first time I'll literally be talking about this. And there's a person sitting across from me in the room who doesn't even know that this. But sometimes when I wake up in the morning lately, I get these weird phrases and things that come into my head, like literally right as I wake up, and I'll just hear this statement, this sentence, and I'm like, huh? And I've been learning things about how I believe there's a frequency shift pertaining to 5G and the ways in which it's going to be used to influence our emotions, to track devices, and to somehow actually affect our thought processes through a couple specific places in the body. And I realize by now this is probably common knowledge, but I think I've received this so strongly recently in other work that I'm doing that I believe it bears mentioning. But we have vibratory plates on our skull. One of the number one places in which emotion enters, interacts, and vibrates with the body is at this little space right here next to your temple. They're called our sphenoids. They go right along here. This soft, porous membrane bone right here isn't even really a part of your skull. They're plates that line the skull. And what happens is this vibrates right here with frequency, it vibrates with sound, it vibrates with emotion. And what's crazy is right now we're experiencing a lot of weaponized food. We're getting a tremendous amount of chemtrail activity. And one of the substances that exist in these things is weaponized heavy metal particles. And what's happening is they're literally gathering along the sides of the body. They're creating this vibratory state that vibrates with emotion, and the frequency of 5G can be tweaked to just a level that it will create an incredible disruption of the energy flow, the blood flow, and the emotional states of the brain. So this is where they can manipulate your emotions, manipulate your thought patterns. And then where else does that go? It goes down into our sweat glands, and especially into the lymph. Lymph has been one of the most incredible things that I've been learning about lately, because it almost seems to exist, and maybe this is common knowledge for everyone else, but I come to this stuff intuitively. It seems to exist as this whole other structure, this whole other organ, or this system of like energetic anatomy in the body. And what I'm finding is we're able to literally move chi and energy through lymph in the way that catalyzes it and creates this vibratory thing in the body that I think can also be affected by the frequency of 5G to cause incredible sickness, change, all sorts of things about our body. And so what I think they're going to be doing is being able to mobilize the lymph flow fluid in the body, the electrochemical resonance around the sides of the head, and I think probably other elements as well. But I believe it's just one of the increased layers of like surveillance and like the control structure that's being placed on us that, in my opinion, will eventually lead to, if we follow down this timeline path, into this sort of AI sentience, and the idea that on a certain level we can reach a saturation point with respect to 5G frequencies, heavy metal in the body, the saturation of it in specific places that can actually cause us to be literally controlled and kind of herded around like these drones. And so I think that can be one of the things that could happen with 5G. That was probably a crazy tirade that I just went on there.
No, it's good. Do you feel like there's any socially explainable benefit to the 5G aside from just your internet is going to be faster, or is it just in your mind just purely a facade for more control?
Is there a utility to it?
Yeah.
Sure. I think there's probably a utility to it on a certain level. If you're, if you're, this might be where we go into the woo-woo can of worms land, but I believe if you're just kind of inherently aligned with the AI sentience timeline and you're here to experience the technological ascension, and some of us are here for that. Not everyone is here for the spiritual consciousness ascension. Some of us are choosing to literally integrate with, that machine sentience. That's part of the downfall of Atlantis, which is what we're reliving again right now. So a lot of us are making different choices, but I believe, I'm sure there's a utility to it. Our internet will work really fast and some people will love it. For other people, end up making us sick and we might move out, and who knows, this thing might not even be integrated on a great level, and maybe we're just going through this sort of like speculation phase like we did with Y2K. That whole thing, like, oh man, stop. Oh my God, we might be doing kind of like a Y2K, catastrophe. I can't even say the word, but we're not going to make it, this whole
catastrophe.
There you go. Thanks. I believe there's a utility for it. I believe there's even a way in which we can utilize these structures with our own consciousness and actually strengthen ourselves, or create some sort of a feedback loop within these energetic structures that in which we can use the very thing they're using against us to take them down, or maybe the old statement, to strengthen ourselves against what's being placed on us in this strange like control grid that we're living in. So I don't know if that makes sense, but I think there's a multitude of purposes for it, and it doesn't have to be all evil. So
I mean, I appreciate fast internet. We couldn't have a show here if we didn't have some
Totally.
form of fast internet.
Totally.
and the I always feel like the people that are yelling the loudest are the ones who are doing the most evasion of actual self work. And
Oh, you know what? I fully agree with that. It's funny that you mentioned that because I've noticed a similar trend with people that have a constant need to vocally present or textually via social media the incredibly intricate and tender workings of their awakening, and I often find that to be this sort of like social media narcissism in which we're trying to place our all of our laundry on the line. And I think what
mm-hmm,
it does is that it creates this illusion of great things happening in our world. And really, what we're doing is we're just placing it up on the line on social media for everyone to see. And, in my opinion, I think we're going to find in the coming years that it was the people that were working behind the scenes, living in the trenches, actually doing this work and living and going through the process are going to be the ones that are leading this whole, like collective thing. So I don't know if that was even what you're talking about, but
yeah, there's a measure of silence or of stealthiness that I know I embody myself. Uh, just on the basic premise of that, with sort of grotesque or brutish power structures, they work because the loudest element is very visually subdued, right? Which involves having a leader and then having a bunch of sheep or peons or whatever underneath, and then having this big ol' thing happen, and then it creates almost an excuse for the onlookers to just be like, oh well, that thing happened, and now I can get back to my eating my tic tac toes, or like what doing, like it allows you to go back to your sort of mundane regular life, which is fine, but at the same time, there is also some very real things going on in all of our lives, and as a society, I feel like we've had an elephant in the room for a really long time.
yeah.
And most of us know this with family and friends, but at the same time, if you look at the news, like the amount of relevance between like what the news is reporting and what we feel internally, because our worlds are held internally, right? So like they're saying something about these internal universes that we all allow a fraction to slip out into this like 3D manifest world. It's like a joke. It's like a mockery almost of us, which should not be taken as, oh fuck that guy because he called me stupid. No, because like they're telling us like, you guys have been asleep for a really 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 long time. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's not it's there's not any part of it that is like unworthy, or all of it is very much poignant, I guess I can say. Like it's very much like all of it is deserving of very careful examination externally and internally,
Yeah.
and it's worthy of our time.
I feel you. I feel you. Hmm. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Hmm.
How to respond to that? I'm like, huh? Yes. Yes. yeah. Yeah.
I say a lot of words sometimes.
Oh no, no, that's great. I'm like sitting here like digesting that, going like, oh, interesting. How would you respond to this statement? I'm in with this, this interior exterior integration thing and the complete value of it all, and the immensity of our experience here. I do actually have a little bit of a question for you, and I realize this is kind of, maybe we're once again going on like a non sequitorial area, but what how are you feeling about the nature of extraterrestrial contact, extraterrestrial disclosure? What's happening in your world with respect to that? Uh,
I
anything?
can only I can't speak on terms of direct contact because I have not had that aside from when I smoked too much weed. I think I had some entity take advantage of me and just basically tell me like, you need to sit there and don't move. It was just the whole whatever that was sort of like I don't feel like it had any relation to what extraterrestrials would be.
Right.
But what
When did
I
that happen?
this was early 20s. Yeah, I had a bad weed experience. I've talked about it in many ways
Huh.
on the channel, but if you haven't been a follower, then you wouldn't have heard about it.
Right. Right.
But like the general impression of smoking weed is that it feels good, right? Like there's some sort of
Mhm.
you relax and blah blah. For me, it wasn't anything of that. It was like a blast off into the if you could imagine the worst trip possible, take all of Arrowwood's bad trip experiences and then put them all together and make a conglomerate of those, and then have me think I'm smoking weed and then fall into that. That's kind of like what it was for me, and it was very traumatic and horrifying, and it was just bad. but
Yeah.
but it taught me a lot about the sort of superficiality of this 3D holographic presentation as we sort of like flow through it, and I understood that the subconscious, which kind of runs the show until the human or the divine essence awakens within the vessel, the thing is just on autopilot and it doesn't know anything, and
Yeah.
it requires some like sledgehammer to the face, like how that was for me, uh, to wake me up, kind of.
Interesting. And so, have you smoked it since then, or was that a one time thing? Have you had
I
other
have, I have.
experience? Yeah. How has it been since then?
It was lessening in impact every time, and the first time was like smoking a huge bong, like three massive bong rips, and I was like pristine, like freshly driven snow, as far as like these things. I had no
Yeah. Yeah.
no exposure whatsoever, so it was just a shot into the dark, like the deepest dark you could imagine.
I Some people have I had a friend that had a very similar experience, and I believe that that's common for some of us, that will have this other sort of like element. It could be something within the blood. I think there's either going to be a marker for it at some point. They're going to understand with relation to cannabis, in which some of us will initially have an incredibly difficult, like wildly almost dissociative experience with it.
Hmm.
People, like, I had the exact opposite. The first time I ever smoked it, literally nothing happened. Huge, massive hits, nothing. I was like,
Uh-huh.
like in here hanging out with people, going, "Yeah, I'm having a good time." Nothing happened to me. So it's interesting. There's a whole range of how that affects us. But the reason why I asked about that is because just the way that you described it sounds like such a forced door opening within the dimensional layers of the body, that you could have had this like a sort of step in entity type thing where they show up, you become available on this grid, and they can actually just come through and harvest loosh, or literally create a fear response in
It
your
it
body.
was that. It was that.
Take it from me and run. Yeah.
That was the attempt that was trying to happen. As I understand it now, I withstood the attempt, and I don't claim to be a walk-in. I don't figure to be a walk-in by any stretch. I was very much here through the childhood, and I saw everything. And
Yeah.
the uh, the weed thing was an attempt by, from my understanding, what they call the parasite or the mind virus,
Yep.
and you know nothing that anybody describes here in terms of regular people talk like comes close to describing what that thing is, because that thing takes every aspect of you and your intimate self, and it tweaks it off to an angle, and then when you look at it, it tweaks it off to another angle, and then you fall into that like cartwheeling Ouroboros style descension into the
Yep.
abyss. That's literally what that thing wants. It wants to eat all and leave nothing, and that's just what it is. And I didn't know that that thing existed prior to this experience.
That's a trip. Yeah, you're literally describing entity attachment, hyper dimensional entity interaction, and the ways in which they will literally find the core wound in your body, whatever that core wound is, and it will loop and play that thing back to you over and over again in this endless cascading number of ways in which it will constantly siphon this version of pain, sadness, anxiety, or whatever it is out of your body. And what's crazy, there's a number of areas where those things tend to attach to, at least in my work on the things that I'm finding on a daily basis. And one of those is those areas that we talked about along here. We have a couple areas in which they tend to grab onto. The triple heater, the triple heater meridian, which is also along the sides of the head in somewhat of a triangular pattern right here, oftentimes will sort of lodge energy from other people. It could be a parasite, it could be an entity, it can literally be an archonic or AI, sort of like a device that is just set there to siphon up or attract energy. Along with that, you also have like the gallbladder right here, which is where that running loop place, which is another place where those things attach. Along the back of the head is where you tend to get things that come in through dream time incursions, dream time attacks, or when people will experience a very traumatic energy right as they're coming in and out of sleep. That's where those things attach all the way down into the solar plexus, where other people will have a whole other corridor, like a connection to the astral or like dimensional layers of the body. So yeah, there's a whole number of areas where that stuff attaches to.
Mm-hmm.
I digress. Yeah. So.
Yeah. But that experience, it did shape how I move now, and how my mind moves now, and I'm not susceptible to that kind of attack anymore because of what I went through.
Yeah.
But I also appreciate it because it showed me a part of myself that isn't even truly myself, so to speak. It was more something that can be piggybacked on and used to extract something, whether you call it wish or whatever, it doesn't matter. But it was like it was like a self vulnerability that I didn't know existed, but I also didn't know that I existed. So like the whole thing was like a big wake up / attack / everything all at once.
I feel you. Interesting. Yeah. Any other questions? Anything you're wondering about?
I think what do you feel about the word ascension? Not all your mind associated parts of it, but just that word as being a loaded term inside of the you know the alternative, the fringe side of things. How do you feel about that word?
Ascension as a whole, just as a term, I believe there's a lot of misconceptions about the process of ascension. If we define it, we understand it to be a rising process, moving through layers of a thing on, some sort of a rise. And so we look at that through the lens of like consciousness expansion, which is what we're going through. And I think right now we can describe an ascension as this, movement through layers of consciousness that we're experiencing over the incarnational cycles. That to me is an absolutely real thing. And it's, in my opinion, primary reasons why literally I shouldn't say every, I shouldn't even say literally, but a vast majority of us here existing on the earth plane incarnated specifically to be alive during this ascension or this consciousness upgrading period of our evolution. And so I think on one hand, it's an absolutely real thing that's occurring in this graduated level process as we go through this, life cycle. And on the other side, there's been this completely contrived and convoluted new wave idea around a thing we call ascension that says we're going through this process of, turning into non-physical light beings in the course of a third dimensional lifetime in which we're going to suddenly explode into this thing everyone describes 5D. Which is a big can of worms and a very misunderstood concept, and I myself don't even understand it. But what I can tell you is that it will become, in my opinion, kind of similar to the term New Age, in that it will describe an overarching spiritual philosophy and a somewhat convoluted lifestyle, but at the same time, it will also describe a completely legitimate wave of consciousness expansion that's occurring. So, it's like a multi-level thing. in my opinion, I think ascension for the majority of us in the third dimensional incarnation will not involve this sort of misconstrued 5D idea, which, just so you know, we're already existing in 5D. We've been existing in that prior to this incarnation, before we were born, throughout the whole realm of our existences, we've always been connected to a 5D consciousness. But what's happening is in this third dimensional incarnation cycle that we're in, we're actually becoming aware of the fourth dimensional layers of our energy body, which is what allows us to interact with the levels of 5D consciousness that we're already existing in. So the reality is, for many of us, we're going through a fourth density, fourth dimensional integration. And there are differences in both of those terms, but that's what we're actually experiencing. So the ascension process for us in this lifetime, in my opinion, and I'm sure there's many people that will be like, that's not true. We're in 5D. Look, I'm there right now. Or, all of this stuff will come out and, maybe that's true. But we're going through a fourth density transitional integration in this cycle. So that's the way I see ascension, and that's the way I've been experiencing it. That's what's been shown to me. So I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I went on a weird tangent there.
Do you and I would like to wrap it up. I would like to wrap this up in a couple minutes, but if you could on the last, if you could talk about what people refer to as the event. And I know that's also a loaded term, but what do you feel that is? And is that just what people refer to as oneness, or is that something that can be experienced by like a bunch of people at the same time, or is it all personal, or does it not exist? What do you think about it?
Right. The solar flash. Thank you. And the event, or whatever that is. By my understanding, that talks about a number of things: actual physical eruption, or a coronal mass ejection resulting from the sun that has some sort of a potentially catastrophic or consciousness-altering effect on the entire population of the Earth, that being a physical event, I think that we're already having that. I think that we've had multiple versions of them. They'll come in cascading waves of intensity over the next, 20, 30, however many years. So I think on a certain level, there is a physical event that's taking place. That's one aspect of it. I think there is also an event that's taking place on an identical level inside the universe existing within each of us, which pertains directly to the idea of ascension that we're just talking about. In my opinion, this so-called event is the act of going through ascension, which is also one of the primary elements of self-realization, or gaining knowledge of the self. So we're going through a multi-leveled event process whereby we will experience a greater event on the collective and sort of societal level with, these solar flashes, and also within us. I think in coming to the idea of oneness, I think it's an eventual realization that happens in each of us as we go through the path of spiritual development. But I think it also, dependent on what choice we make. And one of the things that happens when we move into fourth density specifically is that you will make a polarization choice. Choose the service to self or the service to others sort of path. Mm-hmm. That becomes way more polarized as we go into fourth density. So I think it also bringing into the idea the solar event, or this just event, or the solar flash, will also correspond with a literal choice and polarity, in which we will also be choosing an aspect of the self, and kind of that, if you want to get even crazier, that new world, old world kind of bifurcation of timelines that we're going through. Mm-hmm. My opinion, to summarize that, I think the event is a multi-layered thing that's happening on both physical, energetic, galactic, and also internal level. Mm-hmm. It's going to be different for each of us. So
multi-dimensional.
Totally. We are multi-dimensional beings. That's why we came here. So I hope that...
Yeah, it's good. It's good. I would like to kind of wrap it up now because we're a little bit past an hour.
Oh, yeah, we are. I know. Yeah, we kept going. Thanks.
But yeah, thank you for coming on. You were definitely a different dimension as far as conversational style. So I definitely appreciate that.
Yeah, you too, man. Thanks for inviting.
Yeah, and it will probably air. What's today? Sunday. I have one. It will air tomorrow. I think tomorrow night.
Oh, cool.
And I'll send you the link. So if you would like to share it with your people,
absolutely.
You could do that.
I definitely will. Thank you so much, man.
Yeah, and thank you for coming on, Matthew. I appreciate it.
Sure. It was nice to meet you, Gary. Thanks. Hopefully, we will be talking in the future.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks, brother.
Okay.